"Don't hurt me, I'll give you sons," the peasant girl cried. But the prince just sat and listened. In a kingdom where a poor girl can be beaten for stealing bread, one desperate plea stops a crowd cold. The guards expected punishment. The nobles expected mockery. But the young prince did the unthinkable. He showed mercy. And in that single moment, the fate of a kingdom began to change. Yet mercy in the great hall sparks fury in the shadows. A jealous rival whispers lies. A king demands obedience. And a girl of no birth finds herself tangled in a web of betrayal, dungeons, and secrets that could destroy them both. The church bells toll, hooves thunder through the night, and the line between crown and commoner begins to blur. But can love, built on a single act of compassion, survive a world that would rather see them torn apart? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The spring morning sun cast long shadows across the village square, where market stalls groaned under the weight of fresh bread, turnips, and colorful bolts of cloth. The mix of sweet roasting chestnuts and pungent horse manure filled the air as villagers hurried about their morning shopping. Armed soldiers in polished breastplates patrolled between the stalls, their boots clicking against the cobblestones as they watched the peasants with suspicious eyes. Annelise's stomach growled as she slipped between the crowded market stalls. Her worn dress hung loose on her thin frame, and her fingers trembled as she glanced at the fresh loaves cooling on the baker's wooden table. The thought of her little brother Thomas and sister Marie, waiting hungry in their tiny cottage, gave her courage. While the plump baker argued with a customer over prices, Annelise's quick hands darted out and tucked a crusty loaf under her. "Shawl! Thief! Stop her!" The baker's apprentice's shout cut through the market's bustle. His meaty hand clamped onto Annelise's arm, yanking her backward. The bread tumbled from her shawl onto the dirt. "Please," Annelise whispered, her cheeks burning with shame as the apprentice dragged her into the center of the square. "My siblings haven't eaten in 2 days." But her soft plea was drowned out by the growing crowd's jeers. "Whip the little thief!" Someone called. Others took up the cry, pressing closer to watch her punishment. "Make way for the king's justice." A soldier's commanding voice silenced the mob. 2 guards in gleaming armor pushed through the crowd, their red capes bright against the drab market day clothes. The taller guard looked down at Annelise with cold eyes. "His Highness Prince Leopold holds audience today. Let him decide the fate of this bread thief." Annelise's knees weakened at his words. The prince himself would judge her crime. She had heard he was fair-minded, unlike his cruel father the king. But what mercy could a common thief expect from royal justice? The guards marched her through the winding streets, past the same shops and homes she'd known all her life. Now, neighbors who had always smiled and greeted her turned away in shame. Behind her, she heard the patter of small feet and familiar crying. Thomas and Marie had followed. Her heart ached at their frightened sobs. "Stay back!" The guards' sharp command made her siblings freeze in their tracks. Annelise wanted to run to them, to promise everything would be well. But the soldier's grip on her arms never loosened. The ducal palace rose before them, its stone walls stretching toward the sky. Annelise had never been closer than the outer gates before. Now the guards shoved her through carved wooden doors taller than 3 men, into a great hall that seemed to stretch forever. Dozens of richly dressed nobles lined the walls, their silk skirts rustling as they turned to stare. Annelise trembled, painfully aware of her dirty feet and patched dress. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat an elegant young man wearing a gold circlet, Prince Leopold himself. The guards pushed Annelise forward to face royal justice. The afternoon sun streamed through tall stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the marble floor of the great audience chamber. Noble ladies fluttered delicate fans against the stuffiness, their silk dresses rustling as they whispered behind gloved hands. Prince Leopold sat straight-backed on his carved wooden chair of state, his blue velvet doublet gleaming in the colored light. Annelies's legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed to her knees before the raised platform, her thin arms trembling as she pressed her forehead to the cool stone floor. "Please, Your Highness, have mercy." Her voice cracked with desperation. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged cheeks. As she lifted her head, "Don't hurt me. I'll give you sons." The words burst from her lips before she could stop them. A shocked silence fell over the hall. Then came the sneers and tittering laughs of the nobles. How dare she address His Highness so boldly? A countess hissed. Other courtiers whispered behind their hands, faces twisted with scandalized disgust at such impropriety from a common thief. But Prince Leopold didn't laugh. His green eyes studied Annelies's trembling form with unexpected gentleness. "Release her bindings," he commanded, his voice clear and firm. The guards hesitated only a moment before unlocking the iron shackles from Annelies's wrists. They clattered to the floor as Leopold rose from his chair. "Stand, if you please," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that sent fresh whispers rippling through the crowd. "Tell me why you stole the bread." Annelies struggled to her feet, keeping her eyes downcast as custom demanded. "My parents died of fever this winter, Your Highness. I have a brother and sister, just little ones. We've had nothing to eat for 2 days." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. No stealing is wrong, but I couldn't bear to hear them cry from hunger anymore." Leopold nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And where are these siblings now?" "Following behind when I was brought here, Your Highness. They're all alone." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The prince turned to the red-faced baker who stood waiting for justice. "The charges are dismissed." The girl clearly acted from desperate need, not malice. Before the baker could protest, Leopold raised his hand. "You will be compensated for the bread." He gestured to a stern-faced woman in a white apron who stood near the kitchen entrance. "Matron, take this girl into your charge. She will work in the castle kitchens, an honest position where she can earn food for her family." The kitchen matron stepped forward, her practical shoes clicking on the marble as she took Annelies's arm. "Come along then, girl," she said gruffly. "But not you, Nkindl. Why?" As the matron led Annelies toward the servants' entrance, outraged mutters followed them. "Rewarding a thief? Most improper. What can His Highness be thinking?" Prince Leopold paid no attention to the scandalized nobles. His thoughtful gaze followed Annelies's retreating form until she disappeared through the heavy wooden door. The evening bells tolled across the castle grounds as shadows lengthened in the vast kitchen. Smoke from multiple hearths filled the air, mixing with the rich aromas of roasting meats and bubbling stews. Servants bustled about, their wooden clogs clicking against the stone floor as they chopped mountains of turnips and tended to grate iron spits laden with rotating joints of meat. The kitchen matron thrust a bundle of rough wool into Annelies's arms. "Change into these," she ordered, not unkindly. "Can't have you working in those filthy rags." Annelies clutched the coarse servant's clothes to her chest, grateful for their clean smell despite their scratchy texture. In a small side chamber, she changed quickly, tying the apron strings with trembling fingers. The work dress was plain but sturdy, marking her new station as a castle servant. "Mind you don't tear them," the matron warned when Annelies returned. "Now then, girl, show me you know your way around a kitchen. Start with those turnips." The work was harder than anything Annelies had known before. Her shoulders ached from lifting heavy pots, and her hands grew red and chapped from scrubbing. Yet there was honesty in the labor, and the kitchen's warmth felt safer than the streets, where she had nearly met her doom that morning. "That's her, the one who offered to give the prince sons," a scullery maid whispered too loudly to her companion, both giggling behind their hands. "Hush now," another servant scolded, though her eyes held pity as she glanced at Annalise. Poor thing was desperate, anyone can see that. The whispers followed Annalise throughout the evening as she learned her tasks. Some servants snickered at her presumption, while others offered small kindnesses, a word of advice about which nobles were kind or cruel, warnings about which stairs creaked at night. As the evening wore on, the kitchen's busy rhythm was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Prince Leopold stepped through the doorway, his fine clothes stark against the humble kitchen surroundings. The servants immediately bowed or curtsied, their movements sending clouds of flour into the air. Merely conducting a routine inspection, he announced, though his eyes searched the room until they found Annalise tending to a great black cauldron of soup. The kitchen matron hurried forward. "Your Highness, we are honored. Shall I show you the storerooms?" "In a moment," Leopold replied, making his way to where Annalise stood frozen by her pot. "I trust you are settling in?" he asked quietly. Annalise curtsied deeply, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, Your Highness. The kitchen matron has been most kind. And your siblings?" His voice was gentle, pitched low so others couldn't hear. "Have arrangements been made for them?" "The matron allowed me to send bread home with a kitchen boy, Your Highness." Annalise's eyes glistened with grateful tears. "They won't go hungry tonight." Leopold nodded, something warm flickering in his gaze. "Good, very good." He studied her face for a moment longer, noting the quiet dignity in her bearing despite her circumstances. Here was no scheming peasant, but a soul of genuine worth. The prince's unusual interest did not go unnoticed. As he departed after his inspection, whispers raced through the castle like wildfire, eventually reaching the Duchess's chambers. Her lady's maid related every detail, how the prince had specifically sought out the peasant girl, how he had spoken to her privately, how his eyes had lingered. The midnight bell tolled its 12 solemn notes across the darkened castle. In the servants' quarters, Annalise lay on her thin straw pallet, still wearing her new wool dress. Her fingers curled around a thick crust of bread she had carefully saved for her brother and sister. Despite the day's trials, exhaustion pulled her quickly toward sleep. The prince's kind words echoed in her mind as she drifted off, unaware of the worried conversations taking place in the Duchess's chambers high above. The morning sun had barely crested the castle walls when the great bells began their sonorous call. Their deep tones echoed across courtyard and corridor, summoning both noble and servant to the great hall. Annalise stood at the very back of the gathering crowd, hastily wiping flour from her hands onto her coarse wool apron. The morning's bread-making had left white dustings in her hair and on her cheeks, marking her clearly as one of the kitchen staff. Tall windows cast long rectangles of light across the polished stone floor, illuminating the assembled court in their finest morning dress. Silk rustled and jewels glinted as ladies adjusted their skirts and gentlemen straightened their embroidered waistcoats. The air held the mixed scents of expensive perfumes, beeswax candles, and the lingering aroma of breakfast breads from the kitchen below. King Frederick stood before his throne, his stern countenance commanding immediate silence from the gathered crowd. Prince Leopold stood to his right, his face a careful mask of neutrality. Annalise noticed his hands were clasped tightly behind his back, knuckles white with tension. "We are pleased to announce," the king's voice boomed through the hall, "the formal betrothal of our son, Prince Leopold, to the Lady Dorothea of Westmark." A wave of appreciative murmurs swept through the assembled nobles as Lady Dorothea stepped forward. She was resplendent in azure silk, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls beneath a pearl-studded net. Her curtsy to the king was perfection itself, her smile radiant as she took her place beside Leopold. Annalise felt her heart plummet to her worn shoes. This was how it should be, she told herself. A prince wed to a proper lady, not mooning after a kitchen maid. Yet when Dorothea's gaze swept the hall and landed on her, Annalise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Those blue eyes held no warmth, only calculation and barely concealed malice. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work and worried thoughts. Evening found Annalise hurrying through the servants' passage with clean linens, the narrow corridor lit only by occasional wall sconces. The flickering shadows made the space seem longer and darker than usual. "Stop right there, kitchen girl." The voice was cultured, cold, and unmistakable. Annalise turned to find Lady Dorothea blocking her path, the lady's silk skirts nearly filling the narrow space. In the dim light, her beauty had a sharp, dangerous edge. "Your Grace," Annalise curtsied, deeply, clutching the linens to her chest like a shield. "Let us be very clear," Dorothea's voice dripped with disdain. "I've heard the whispers about your interaction with Prince Leopold. Whatever foolish hopes you harbor, abandon them now. He is mine by royal decree, and I will not have my future marriage tainted by servant girl gossip. My lady, I would never presume." "Silence." Dorothea stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the confined space. "If I hear even a whisper that you've spoken to him again, I will ensure you're dismissed from the castle. Your siblings would miss these kitchen scraps you've been sending them, wouldn't they?" The threat hung in the air like poison as Dorothea swept past, leaving Annalise trembling in the shadows. Later that night, unable to sleep, Annalise sought solace in the castle's small chapel. The space was empty save for rows of guttering candles and the comfort of ancient stones. She knelt before the altar, prayers mixing with tears she had refused to shed earlier. A soft footfall behind her made her start. "I thought I might find you here." Leopold's voice was gentle in the sacred silence. Annalise scrambled to her feet, remembering Dorothea's threat, but the prince raised a hand to stay her retreat. "Please," he said softly, "remain." He moved to stand beside her, both of them gazing at the flickering altar candles. "You heard the announcement this morning." "Yes, Your Highness." "May I offer my congratulations?" "You may offer your sympathy instead." His smile was bitter in the candlelight. "I am bound by my father's word and the needs of the kingdom. But," he turned to face her directly, his eyes earnest in the dim light, "my heart is not yet promised." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and impossible hope. Annalise stood frozen, torn between the warmth blooming in her chest and the cold memory of Dorothea's threats. The chapel candles burned ever lower as Leopold finally turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her warring feelings of hope and despair. The days slipped by like water through cupped hands. Annalise moved through the castle's great hall, balancing a tray of fresh bread and wine jugs. Candlelight flickered across the faces of richly dressed nobles who lounged at the long tables, picking at roasted pheasant and gossiping behind jeweled fingers. "Did you hear about that kitchen maid?" a lady in purple silk whispered, not bothering to lower her voice as Annalise approached. "The one who made that shocking display before the prince." "Oh yes," her companion replied, accepting a goblet of wine from Annalise's trembling hands. "I heard she's been entertaining the soldiers at night. Quite the scandal brewing there." Annalise's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes downcast and continued her work. The whispers followed her like angry wasps. By midnight, the rumor had grown wings. She was with child, they said, carrying a soldier's bastard. The story spread through the castle like wildfire, reaching even the lowest scullery maids who now drew away from her at the washing trough. "We cannot have such impropriety among the staff," the steward declared the next morning, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Pack your things, girl. You'll be gone by sunset." Annalise stood in his office, hands clasped tightly before her. "Sir, please," she whispered. "The rumors aren't true." "I've never—" The door burst open, and Prince Leopold strode in, his riding boots still muddy from the morning hunt. "What is this I hear about dismissing staff based on idle gossip?" The steward bowed low. "Your Highness, we merely wish to maintain the castle's reputation. By destroying an innocent girl's? Leopold's voice cut through the air like steel. I will not have it. That evening, as nobles gathered for dinner in the great hall, Leopold stood suddenly from his chair. The clatter of silver on plates fell silent. My lords and ladies, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner. It has come to my attention that cruel rumors circulate regarding one of our servants. I speak now to defend her honor. His eyes found Lady Dorothea's shocked face. Anneliese has served this household with dignity and virtue. Any who spread lies about her character will answer to me personally. A hush fell over the hall. Anneliese, standing in the shadows with her serving tray, felt tears prick her eyes. Later that night, a kitchen boy slipped her a note. Garden. Midnight. The castle gardens lay silent under a blanket of stars. Anneliese hurried along the gravel paths, her heart thundering in her chest. There, beside the old stone fountain, stood Leopold. You shouldn't have defended me, she whispered as she drew near. Lady Dorothea seeks to destroy. What she cannot understand, Leopold's voice was gentle. I know your heart, Anneliese. I know your truth. But the rumors are poison, nothing more. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the moonlight reflected in his eyes. I have watched you these past weeks. Your kindness to the younger servants. The extra bread you save for your siblings. The dignity with which you bear every slight. His hand reached for hers but stopped short of touching. You are worth more than all their hollow titles. Anneliese's breath caught. We cannot, I know. The words held all the weight of his crown, his duty, his promised betrothal. But I would not have you doubt your worth nor my faith in you. Thunder rolled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the leaves above them. Go, Leopold said softly, before you're missed. Anneliese gathered her skirts and fled through the darkening gardens as the rain began to fall in earnest. Her feet carried her through servant passages and down-worn stone steps to her small cot in the servants' quarters. Soaked and trembling, she knelt beside her bed. Please, she whispered to the darkness, her hands clasped in prayer. Don't let my presence here bring ruin to my family. Don't let my heart's foolishness destroy those I love. The rain drummed against the narrow window, drowning out her quiet sobs as she prayed for strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Leopold pulled the rough wool cap lower over his brow. Gone were his fine silk doublet and polished boots. Instead, he wore the simple garments of a stable hand, coarse brown breeches and a patched shirt that scratched against his skin. His heart beat quickly as he waited by the castle's small eastern gate, far from the prying eyes of nobles and servants alike. Anneliese appeared moments later, her own servant's dress exchanged for a plain gray kirtle. Her eyes widened at the sight of the disguised prince. Sir, she whispered, catching herself. You need not do this. I must, Leopold replied softly. I would know your world, not just mine. Together they slipped through the gate and made their way down the winding path toward the village. The morning air was fresh after yesterday's rain, rich with the scent of wet earth and spring flowers. Leopold found himself studying everything with new eyes, the weight of mud on his boots, the scratch of rough fabric, the way common folk nodded to them as equals rather than bowing deeply. When they reached the humble cottage where Anneliese's siblings lived with their elderly aunt, Leopold's breath caught at its simplicity. The thatched roof sagged in places, and the walls leaned slightly, but bright flowers grew in wooden boxes beneath the windows. Inside, two young children looked up from their wooden toys, a girl of perhaps 10 years and a boy of 7 or 8. Annie! They cried in unison, running to embrace their sister. Leopold hung back, suddenly unsure of himself in this world so different from his own. This is Leo, Anneliese said carefully. He works in the castle stables. He's brought us fresh bread from the kitchens. Leopold pulled the wrapped loaf from his satchel, not the fine white bread of the noble tables, but hearty brown bread still warm from the ovens. The children's eyes lit up as though he'd presented gold. They sat together at the rough wooden table, breaking bread and sharing cups of watered ale. The children chattered about their days, tales of chasing chickens and learning their letters. From the village priest, Leopold found himself smiling more genuinely than he had in months of court banquets. "Will you show him father's place?" the little girl asked Anneliese. A shadow crossed her face, but she nodded. They walked together to the village churchyard, where simple wooden crosses marked the graves of common folk. Anneliese knelt before one, touching the rough-carved name with gentle fingers. "He was a carpenter," she said softly, "the finest in 3 villages. But when the fever came," her voice broke. "Mother followed him within the month. I was 14, suddenly responsible for 2 little ones." Leopold knelt beside her in the mud, no longer caring about his borrowed clothes. "You've shown more nobility in caring for them than most who wear silk and jewels," he said quietly. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Sometimes I wake terrified that I'll fail them somehow, that we'll lose the cottage or fall ill, or—" "No," Leopold said firmly, taking her hand. "I swear to you, Anneliese, I will never let harm come to you or your family. Whatever happens, whatever comes, you have my word." They remained there in silence as the afternoon light began to fade. When they finally rose to return to the castle, they found the recent rains had turned the road to thick mud. Their progress was slow, and darkness fell quickly. Leopold lit the small lantern he'd brought, its warm glow creating a private world around them as they picked their way carefully back. Neither spoke much, both lost in thought about the day's simple joys and the complications that lay ahead. At last they reached the castle stables, where shadows offered protection from watching eyes. "Thank you," Anneliese whispered, "for understanding. Thank you for showing me what truly matters." Leopold replied softly. They parted reluctantly, each going their separate ways in the darkness. Joy filled their hearts from the precious hours of freedom they'd shared, but it was tempered by the weight of knowing such moments could not last. The castle loomed above them, a stark reminder of the world of rank and privilege that threatened to keep them apart. The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewel box come to life. Hundreds of beeswax candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, their light dancing off gilt-framed mirrors and polished marble floors. Ladies in silk gowns swished between tables laden with roasted peacock and silver bowls of sugared fruits. The air hung heavy with perfume and the warmth of too many bodies pressed together in their finery. Anneliese stood quietly against the wall with other servants, her hands steady as she poured wine for passing nobles. Her simple brown dress and white apron marked her as clearly as any brand, yet she held herself with quiet dignity. From across the room, she caught Prince Leopold's eye for just a moment before lowering her gaze. Lady Dorothea swept through the crowd like a ship under full sail, her crimson gown rustling as nobles parted before her. Her face wore an expression of grave concern that did not quite reach her triumphant eyes. In her gloved hands, she clutched a small packet of letters tied with ribbon. "Your Majesty," she called out, dropping into a deep curtsy before King Frederick's throne. "I come bearing grave news that cannot wait. The security of the realm itself is at stake." The music died away. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch as Dorothea presented the letters with trembling fingers. These were discovered hidden among the servants' quarters. They prove beyond doubt that the kitchen maid Anneliese has been corresponding with our enemies abroad. A gasp rippled through the assembly. The king's face darkened like a thundercloud as he snatched the papers from Dorothea's hands. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression growing more terrible with each line. "Treason," he spat, surging to his feet. "Guards, seize that girl at once." Leopold stepped forward, his face pale. "Father, there must be some mistake." Anneliese's silence The king's voice cracked like a whip. "You forget yourself, my son. Would you defend a traitor against your own blood?" Two guards grabbed Annalise roughly by the arms. The wine pitcher she held crashed to the floor, spreading like a dark stain across the marble. She did not struggle or cry out, though her face had gone white as chalk. "Your Majesty, I swear I have written no letters," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I cannot even read or write. These must be forgeries." "The guilty always plead innocence," Dorothea said softly, her smile cruel. "Perhaps the dungeon will loosen her tongue." Leopold made another attempt to speak, but his father's glare struck him silent. The prince's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he watched the guards drag Annalise from the hall. Whispers and shocked murmurs followed in her wake. "Let this be a lesson," the king announced to the gathered nobility. "No one, however humble their station, shall escape justice if they plot against the crown." The guards marched Annalise through torchlit corridors and down winding stone stairs. Their boots echoed against the walls as they descended deeper into the castle's bowels. The air grew colder and damper with each step until at last they reached the dungeons. Iron chains rattled as they secured her wrists and ankles. Annalise said nothing as they pushed her into a tiny cell barely large enough to lie down in. The heavy wooden door groaned shut on rusted hinges, and the key turned with a sound like bones breaking. Left alone in the pitch darkness, Annalise sank down onto the damp straw that covered the floor. Her chains clinked softly as she drew her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her body. The only light came from a tiny barred window set high in the wall, letting in a thin slice of moonlight. "Lord above," she whispered into the darkness, her voice hardly more than a breath, "give me strength to endure this trial. Watch over my siblings and help Prince Leopold uncover the truth." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she brushed it away. She would not give her enemies the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. The dungeon settled into silence around her, broken only by the occasional scurrying of rats and the distant drip of water. Annalise huddled deeper into herself, shivering as the cold stone walls seemed to leach the very life from her bones. She knew a long night lay ahead, but she held on to hope that truth would eventually triumph over lies. Dawn crept through the narrow window of Annalise's cell, its weak gray light doing little to warm the damp stone walls. The thin blanket they had given her offered scant protection against the bone-deep chill of the dungeon. She curled tighter into herself on the musty straw pallet, her once clean servant's dress now stained with dirt from the cell floor. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind like a fever dream. The glittering ballroom, Lady Dorothea's triumphant smile, the shocking accusations, and worst of all, the look of helpless anguish on Leopold's face as the guards dragged her away. The weight of the iron shackles on her wrists served as a constant reminder that this was no nightmare she could wake from. Annalise's thoughts turned to her younger siblings, little Marie and Thomas, waiting in their humble cottage, not knowing why their sister hadn't returned. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks as she remembered their thin faces looking up at her with trust and love. She had promised to protect them, to keep them fed and safe. Now who would care for them? "I asked only not to be hurt," she whispered into the dim light, her voice rough from crying. "And instead, I found love." The irony of it made her heart ache, that in trying to survive, she had found something worth more than survival, only to lose everything. The scrape of boots on stone announced the jailer's morning rounds. He was a squat, unpleasant man who seemed to take particular delight in tormenting his prisoners. His face appeared at the small window in her cell door, his yellowed teeth showing in a cruel grin. "Comfortable, are we?" he sneered. "Best get used to it, though not for long. Word is they'll have your pretty head off within days. Plotting against the crown?" He clicked his tongue. "That's treason, that is. Even your prince can't save you. Now, Annalise turned her face to the wall, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. But his words settled like lead in her stomach. Execution? Surely they wouldn't, but she knew they would. Noble families had been destroyed for less than what she was accused of. Meanwhile, several floors above in the castle proper, Prince Leopold paced in his private study. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. The chamberlain stood quietly by the desk, watching his master with concerned eyes. "Show me again," Leopold commanded, stopping to examine the document spread across his desk. The chamberlain stepped forward, pointing to subtle details in the forged letters. "See here, Your Highness. The seal is perfectly formed, too perfect. Lady Dorothea's forger used a false stamp, and the parchment." The older man lifted one sheet. "This paper bears a watermark from our own stores. No foreign conspirator would have access to the castle's private paper supply." Leopold's hands clenched into fists. "And you're certain you can prove this?" "Beyond any doubt, Your Highness. I have kept meticulous records of all paper and seal usage. Lady Dorothea's schemes leave a clear trail, if one knows where to look." The prince straightened, determination hardening his features. "Then I must speak with my father. I will not let an innocent woman die for Dorothea's ambitions." "Your Highness," the chamberlain cautioned, "Lady Dorothea's family is powerful. To accuse her—" "I don't care about politics anymore," Leopold cut him off. "I care about justice. And," he paused, then admitted quietly, "I care about her." In her cold cell, Annalise had lost track of time when she heard footsteps approaching, different from the jailer's heavy tread. These steps were quick, purposeful. Her heart began to race. Was this it? Had they come for her already? The cell door creaked open. Annalise pressed herself against the wall, trembling, expecting to see the executioner's dark figure. Instead, a familiar voice whispered her name. "Leopold?" She breathed, hardly daring to believe it. The prince knelt beside her pallet, his fine clothes gathering dungeon dirt. In the dim light, his eyes shone with fierce determination as he took her cold hands in his warm ones. "Hold faith," he whispered urgently. "I will not let you die." Morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the great hall, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Nobles lined the walls in their finest silks and brocades, whispering behind jeweled fans and embroidered handkerchiefs. The air was thick with anticipation as they awaited what most believed would be Annalise's final appearance before the court. King Frederick sat stern-faced upon his throne, his fingers drumming impatiently on the gilded armrest. To his right, Lady Dorothea stood proud and serene in a gown of deep burgundy, her lips curved in the faintest smile of triumph. The guards brought Annalise forward, her simple servant's dress wrinkled from her night in the dungeon, yet she held her head high despite the chains that bound her wrists. "We are gathered," the king began, his voice echoing through the hushed hall, "to pass judgment on these grave accusations of treason. Father." Prince Leopold's clear voice cut through the formal pronouncement. He strode forward, the chamberlain at his side carrying a leather document case. "Before you pass judgment, there is evidence you must see." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Leopold approached the throne. Lady Dorothea's smile faltered slightly, her fingers tightening on her fan. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" the king demanded, though he gestured for Leopold to continue. With careful precision, Leopold withdrew several letters from the case. "These documents reveal the true traitor in our midst." He turned to face the assembled court. "Lady Dorothea has been corresponding with our enemies, offering information about our defenses in exchange for support of her claim to power through marriage." Gasps and exclamations filled the hall. Dorothea's face drained of color, but she quickly recovered. "Absurd," she declared. "Those letters are clearly forgeries, just as this common thief forged her correspondence. If I may, Your Majesty." The chamberlain stepped forward, bowing deeply. His weathered hands spread out the evidence on a velvet-covered table before the throne. I have served as keeper of the royal seals for 30 years. These letters bear Lady Dorothea's personal seal, not a forgery, but her true seal, which I myself witnessed her use countless times. Furthermore, he lifted one page. To the light, this parchment bears the private watermark of her house. The handwriting matches perfectly with her other correspondence in our records. Dorothea's composure cracked. You dare question my loyalty? I am a duchess of the realm. You are a traitor, Leopold said firmly. The evidence is undeniable. King. Frederick rose from his throne, his face darkening with rage as he examined the documents. Lady Dorothea, he thundered, you have betrayed not only our trust, but the sacred duties of your noble birth. You sought to condemn an innocent woman to death to hide your own treachery. Dorothea fell to her knees, her pride finally breaking. Your Majesty, I only sought to protect my interests. Silence! The king's voice shook the very rafters. By my authority as sovereign, I strip you of all titles and lands. You are hereby banished from this realm, never to return upon pain of death. Guards, remove her. As the soldiers dragged the former duchess away, her screams of protest echoed through the corridors. The king turned his attention to Anneliese, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. Release her, he commanded. A guard stepped forward to unlock her shackles. Let it be known, the king proclaimed, that this woman, Anneliese, stands innocent of all charges. Her persecution ends today. He gazed thoughtfully at his son, who had moved to stand protectively beside her. And it seems I must acknowledge what has been before my eyes these many weeks. Leopold took Anneliese's hand, his touch gentle but his stance resolute. The entire court held its breath as he faced the assembled nobility. My people, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, look upon this woman. See not her simple dress or common birth. Her worth is not of birth, but of soul. In her, I have found more nobility of spirit than in all the grand halls and ancient titles of our realm. Anneliese's fingers tightened around his, tears shining in her eyes as she stood tall beside her prince, finally free to face their future together. The church bells of St. Matthew's rang out jubilantly across the village square on a bright summer morning. Their cheerful pealing drew both nobles and commoners alike to witness what many called the most extraordinary wedding in the kingdom's history. After 3 proper readings of the banns, the day had finally arrived for Prince Leopold to wed Anneliese, the former kitchen maid whose pure heart had captured his own. Inside the ancient stone church, morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn flagstones. The noble ladies sat stiffly in their silk gowns, their faces pinched with barely concealed disapproval. Yet their presence was overshadowed by the genuine joy radiating from the village folk and castle servants who packed the wooden pews, their Sunday best freshly pressed for the occasion. Never thought I'd see the day, whispered cook to the kitchen maid beside her, dabbing her eyes with her apron. One of our own, becoming a princess, and her with such a good heart too. Anneliese stood before the altar in a gown that reflected her character perfectly, elegant in its simplicity, with fine white muslin flowing like water and tiny pearls catching the light at her throat and wrists. Her golden hair was crowned with a circlet of white roses, far more becoming than any diamond tiara. At her side stood her younger siblings, Timothy and Rose, dressed in clean linen clothes that had been carefully mended. Their faces shone with pride as they watched their beloved sister. Prince Leopold could scarcely take his eyes from his bride. Gone was the weight of duty that had so long burdened his shoulders. In its place was the light of pure joy, visible to all who looked upon him in his fine blue coat with silver buttons gleaming. The elderly priest raised his weathered hands over the couple, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. Marriage is not merely the joining of estates or the mingling of noble bloodlines, he declared, his wise eyes twinkling. It is the union of souls, blessed by God's own hand. What he has deemed to join together, let no man put asunder. When Leopold slipped the gold ring onto Annelies's finger, a cheer went up from the gathered villagers that nearly rattled the ancient rafters. Even some of the nobles found themselves moved by the obvious love between the couple, though they tried to hide it behind their fans. After the ceremony, the newlyweds did not proceed directly to the castle for festivities as tradition dictated. Instead, they made their way to Annelies's village, their carriage followed by a happy crowd of well-wishers. There, Leopold unrolled a royal proclamation and read it aloud in the village square. By decree of the crown, this village and all its inhabitants are hereby placed under royal protection, he announced, his voice ringing with authority. Let it be known that these people are under our personal care and guardianship. Tears of joy and gratitude flowed freely among the villagers. Children scattered flower petals in the couple's path, while old women called out blessings. Annelies, moved by the scene before her, gathered the village children around her. She knelt carefully in her wedding gown, looking into their wondering faces. "Listen well, little ones," she said softly, though her voice carried to all who stood near. "You need never beg to be spared. Your lives are worth more than crowns. Never let anyone tell you different." The children gazed at her in awe, seeing in her a living fairy tale, the proof that love and goodness could triumph over all obstacles. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the summer fields, Leopold and Annelies slipped away from the celebrating villagers. They walked hand in hand through the ripening wheat, their footsteps matched in perfect rhythm. The evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh-cut hay, nature's own blessing on their union. Annelies, now a princess in title but unchanged in her heart, squeezed her husband's hand. The simple gesture contained all the love and gratitude that words could not express. Together they had proved that true nobility comes not from birth, but from the heart, and that love, when pure and true, could bridge any divide. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.